Okay, thank you. Welcome all to the Limerick.net-Azure user group. I'm Carl. I'm one of the co-organizers with Sackledeep, and we're um, delighted to welcome Bojan, who's a cloud solution architect at Microsoft. He's going to talk to us today and show us, more importantly, because I do like a good demo, Azure Sentinel. So, Bojan, do you want to introduce yourself and then crack on? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Carl and Sakadip, for having me on. And hi, everybody. My name is Bojan, and I work with Microsoft as a cloud solution architect, focusing on security, compliance, and identity, both across modern work and Azure, so across our public cloud platform. I'm delighted to be invited to the conversation you're having today around security, and I'm even more delighted to give you a glimpse into Azure Sentinel and share how we at Microsoft think about security in general, and also how our views may have evolved over the years, and especially influenced by the recent trends we're seeing in the market. But before we jump in, I've thought it might be wise to get a sense and flavor from the audience as to how much they're familiar with this topic. So why don't we start off with a couple of Menti questions? For those of you who haven't used it before, you can log on to menti.com, so MANTI.com, and enter the code you see on the slide. So the code is 8569047 without spaces to get going. And I'll switch then to Menti so we can see the questions. There we have it. So we have our first question loading. So what word comes to mind when you hear SIEM, or Security Information Event Management System? We already have two answers. So one is log, security seems to be a popular one. We also have Splunk, interesting. Boundary, that's an interesting one as well. Security, and the answer is going to be a workload. So we see security more than once. I'm just going to give it a couple more seconds if someone else wants to kind of join and share with us, and then we can go to the next question. Great. I think that's everyone. Love this workload. The second question is, what is the biggest challenge in cybersecurity today? And we got rising number of cyber attacks, security skills in short supply, and too many disconnected products. I want to say we had two front runners, but now we have one. Now we do have two front runners. So rising number of cyber attacks and security skills in short supply. Very interesting. And I personally believe that the skills shortage in cybersecurity to also be the biggest challenge that we have in the industry today. So great. With that, let me then switch gears and let me go back to the presentation. Great. In my presentation today, I brought a couple of slides with me just to cover some foundational topics, and then we're also going to jump straight into a demo. There will be plenty of time for questions. I do encourage you, if you have questions along or during my presentation, feel free to leverage the chat window and paste any questions there, and we can make a couple of maybe pauses or quick stops to answer any questions that you might have. Towards the end, we do have times as well for a Q&A, so if you want to also come off mute then and ask questions, feel free to do so. Okay, I trust everyone can see my slides, and the topic of my presentation today is all around Azure Sentinel and how can companies and partners leverage a next generation SIEM system to protect their workloads against threats, whether those be maybe on premises, hybrid, and or in the cloud. We don't operate in a vacuum, that's for sure, and the recent pandemic has really created a very, very unique climate for most organizations. And what I thought I would do is spend just a little bit time talking about the expanding digital estate to give us that foundational grounding around the challenges and trends that we're seeing in the market. Then we can just talk briefly about how SOC teams operate. And there I would like to touch on the challenges that they face and how this is applicable around positioning of next generation cloud native SIEM solutions. I also want to cover integration with telemetry and data sources and the impact it has on the overall success of not only the solution, but also the SOC teams, and talk about how can we leverage AI, because as you might appreciate, the cloud native SIEM is a very, very different solution than a traditional SIEM such as Splunk that someone shared as part of the answers. Finally, I want to give you a glimpse into a next generation cloud native SIEM that is Azure Sentinel. So we're going to also have plenty of time to jump into the console and do a demo. So why don't I start with the expanded digital estate, just to give us a sense where the conversation is headed. And for us, when we say the expanding digital estate, it's all about acknowledging the challenges that organizations are facing. And what I mean by it is businesses and even government entities are producing terabytes and terabytes and even more data of security relevant log data every day. And that volume continues to increase. We see this growth in data being driven mostly by digitization of business processes, but also an explosion of number of devices that are currently being used in the enterprise. And this makes cybersecurity at its core actually a big data problem. And organizations are now faced with this incredibly difficult task of trying to protect their expanding digital estate from the ever-growing cyber threats and cyber attacks. And more closely, then this aligns to the mission of protecting organizations' information, assets, critical business data, and that mission is becoming increasingly difficult to fulfill because we're seeing the attack techniques, frequency of cyber attacks, and even their complexity evolving very, very fast. And it's then up to the security teams or the SOC teams to make sense of all of this data and spot signs of an attack, an active attack early on, so they can respond appropriately. So I've thought just to cover briefly on what are the main challenges that I hear SOC teams facing. They have a plethora of them, but the main ones I hear from partners and customers I work with are that the threats continue to grow, so both in complexity and volume, and both of those trends are alarming, where these attacks can be heterogeneous, meaning a typical attack might span different parts of the enterprise and even cross different resource types. So it might start on an IoT device, it might then proceed to an endpoint, spread to a cloud service and or database, and it can even involve multiple user accounts or tenants and so on. The second one I see is alert fatigue. SOCs see too many alerts from disconnected products. When we take into account that our enterprise SOC typically has dozens of security products, each produces a very, very large volume of alerts on its own. And in isolation, these products often have a very, very high false positive rate and a very poor response prioritization, which then results in a deafening alert noise for the SOC teams. And unfortunately, I hear the attacks fall through the cracks despite alerts being generated, because unfortunately, legacy SIEMs are functioning as aggregators from what I hear, and they don't increase the overall response capabilities. So what I hear is enterprise SOC teams are really looking for a way to integrate the security products to reduce that noise, but to also give them that prioritization of alerts. And the third main challenge that I hear is what we also covered in the mentee questions, that there is a global shortage of security analysts and professionals in this area. So depending on which report you follow, I believe it was the CSO magazine, if I'm not mistaken, that showed that this shortage is even increasing. And then in 2021, there's going to be over 3.5 million unfilled security jobs. So it's quite a big number. So the question then becomes this: how do we solve and how do we tackle these challenges? One thing I believe can help us leverage, that we can leverage to tackle these challenges, is the power of the cloud. And the idea behind it is that the cloud, so a public cloud, can help us manage that complexity of the expanding digital estate and expanding data. by simplifying and by making security easier to manage. Thereby, in turn, the SOC teams can then maximize their efficiency and free themselves of IT work and help them focus on security-related work, so adding unique value to the company and to the enterprise. I would also like to highlight here that by using the cloud, we can also leverage the large-scale intelligence available in the cloud and make it work for us. So here I am referring to the next generation ML, AI, but also automation, which helps us then supercharge the security relevant work in a SOC. And that's why at Microsoft, we reimagined the SIEM tool to leverage cloud-native capabilities and are calling that solution Azure Sentinel. So one important factoid that you should be aware of is that Azure Sentinel is the first SIEM solution built into a major public cloud platform. So it makes it easy to collect security data across the entire organization, ranging from devices, users, applications, servers, and even third-party clouds such as AWS and GCP, but also others. And since it's built on top of Microsoft's public cloud platform, which is Azure, it offers a limitless cloud scale and speed, meaning it can even automatically scale, making it suitable for companies big and small. And one thing that Microsoft does that makes it relevant in this cybersecurity space is it spends over $1 billion every year on research and development to secure organizations. So this investment enables companies to digitally transform while still being productive and having overall holistic security posture without obviously compromising productivity. And Azure Sentinel, when we think of it as a cloud-native SIEM, there are a couple of key takeaways I would like to share with you. First one, it has been purposefully engineered to address the SecOps challenges that we identified earlier. So it can automatically scale to meet the data collection and storage requirement of companies of any size. And seeing it's part of Azure, so it's accessible through the portal, and it provides dashboards and user interfaces that are both intuitive, but can also help analysts streamline what would be considered typical operations within a security operations center. And when we think about the most traditional SIEMs, most of them really have started on premises, comprising of hardware, software that supported both log ingestion and storage. But as log ingestion and storage requirements increased, companies needed to then go ahead, buy even larger hardware, or maybe distribute the workload between multiple servers. What we've also seen over the last several years is that many vendors in this space have retooled their SIEMs to make them available in a software as a service model or SaaS. However, these SIEMs are typically built on top of a public cloud provider's infrastructure, and they don't offer the automatic scaling and other cloud-native capabilities. And this has all made traditional SIEMs quite expensive to own and operate, often requiring upfront commitment and incurring high costs for infrastructure maintenance and data ingestion. Whereas with a cloud-native SIEM, like Azure Sentinel, there is no upfront cost. So you pay for what you use, providing you a cost-effective SIEM solution. And there are even many scenarios where you would like to integrate your SIEM, or such as Azure Sentinel, with existing or maybe even third-party, to really get that visibility understanding of a complete attack. And this ease of integration with telemetry and with third-party data sources is key to every single SIEM success. And what I often hear from the security teams is that they spend too much time and effort on connecting data sources and maintaining something they call event flows, which in turn reduces the time they spend delivering true security value. And I believe this to be another reason as to why we should be looking to leverage the cloud to offer a straightforward way of connecting data sources. Ideally, this should be done by abstracting servers and networks and by offering something as a service-based connector, For example, in Sentinel, with just a few clicks, you can connect your environment of Azure Sentinel to common use services by users such as Office 365, and then start to receive events immediately. Something we can also see, we'll see in the demo. And by connecting data sources this way, we also don't need to worry about connectivity health or even event spikes, because we're using, again, those cloud native capabilities, elasticity, scale, and we can even integrate it directly with cyber threat intelligence feeds or other cyber threat intelligence sources, whether it be from Microsoft in the form of the Microsoft Intelligence Security Graph, or maybe Taxi or some other CTI information from a third party. One other thing I would like to also highlight is machine learning. I believe most people who are joining us today would agree that communities make more possible, which is why when we look at a community-based approach, we also see a thriving Azure Sentinel community where people share best practices, they share SIEM logic, analytic rules, workflows, and even enhanced machine learning models. And with regards to machine learning, we are seeing more and more this being utilized by bad actors. So machine learning is currently being utilized to attack enterprises, meaning we also need to look at how we can leverage machine learning to empower our cyber defenders. So the people working in the SOCs, people defending companies. Similar to cybersecurity, we're also seeing a very big shortage in skill set, which is why in Azure Sentinel we included advanced anomaly detection using ML and AI that can be executed by SOC teams. And we're going to see it in the demo that you don't need to be a data scientist to execute these machine learning algorithms. They can be executed either by the SOC team or maybe even by the IT manager. And one other thing I would like to highlight here is from a SOC analyst perspective, these people face a huge burden of triaging, as they don't only need to kind of sift through a sea of alerts and data, but also correlate alerts from different products manually if they're using a traditional correlation engine, which is why we see a need for a scalable machine learning algorithm that can correlate these large numbers of low fidelity alerts to few high fidelity security incidences. And this is also while we're using machine learning. And what we've seen in an overall reduction of up to 90% in alert fatigue with early adopters of Azure Sentinel. And with regards to investigating that few high fidelity security incidences, is that in Azure Sentinel, an incident can include one or multiple alerts, and an incident can contain a combination of the relevant evidences that can be used for further investigation. We also see on this slide this kind of graphical and AI-based investigation, which reduces time it takes to fully understand the scope of an attack and its impact. And it can also be used to visualize the timeline of a cyber attack unfolding. And we can then use it also to take quick actions in the same dashboard. And while detecting threats is half the battle, what I also hear is security teams are struggling to follow up on the volume of alerts. And the sheer volume is such that available personnel are simply being overwhelmed, which is too often then the result of situations where many alerts can't simply be attended to, and this leaves the organization then open and vulnerable to attacks that go unnoticed. And many, if not all, of these alerts conform to a recurring pattern that can be addressed by specific and defined course of action that we can then automate to allow cybersecurity operations center professionals to focus on what matters most. And this allows us then to build and run orchestration workloads. So what I've thought I would offer you is a glimpse of how Azure Sentinel looks like. So while I switch gears into the demo environment to show you Azure Sentinel, I will take a quick pause to check if there are any questions. feel free to come off mute, or if you prefer, you can also leverage the chat window. Let me then quickly just check the chat window.
We have one there from Sakaldeep, Bojan. Just can you talk about how Sentinel with the XDR solution would give more value?
Great question. Let me just quickly expand on what XDR is. So if you may have listened to Ignite 2020 in September, which was interestingly the first Ignite that was 100% digital, Microsoft came out with somewhat of a unique approach to the market, where it came out with a lot of solutions that are XDR. XDR is a term coined by the leading cybersecurity analysts that are calling it extended detection and response. And by definition, these solutions are intelligent. They work across silos, so they share signals and intelligence across IT workloads and facilitate automatic remediation. So those are the three main characteristics of XDR solutions. How Sentinel and XDR give more value is Sentinel offers complete end-to-end visibility. Obviously, Microsoft is now a security player in this space, so they do offer XDR solutions for endpoints, identities, applications, data, even servers, and also obviously the cloud workloads in Azure, but also in hybrid. For those workloads that are not covered, we have Sentinel offering that single pane of glass and true end-to-end visibility between not only Microsoft workloads, but also third party. So for a true end-to-end capability. So if we can see it maybe graphically, XDR would be below Sentinel, and Sentinel would then be above it, offering true end-to-end visibility, not only of Microsoft estate, but also any other third party that a company or enterprise might be using, such as, for example, firewalls, maybe even other operational data or networking data. Then let me then quickly go for the other questions. What are Azure Notebooks? Great question. Azure Notebooks is something I wanted to also see if we have appetite to cover in the demo. So if you allow me, I'll expand on it in the demo, but we can see it as machine learning algorithms, or a way to use machine learning algorithms in Azure and obviously in Sentinel as well. Is this something that you are looking at working cross platforms? An example, AWS GCP. Another great question. And yes, so Sentinel together with Azure Arc and Azure Security Center are multi-cloud plays. So Azure Sentinel facilitates multi-cloud, and that's also a huge area of investment supporting then that true end-to-end visibility, which is why we can then see it sitting on top, because not looking only after the Microsoft estate, but also any other third party. So Sentinel and Azure Security Center, which is not familiar for most people, they support multi-cloud. In a sense, you can bring third-party data into it and use it then to either govern in terms for Azure Security Center, but in Sentinel also to gain that visibility. One thing I would also like to highlight, if someone is interested in looking more into it, is Azure Arc. Azure Arc facilitates across, I'm going to call it multi-cloud play. So cross clouds. With the Azure Arc, it's even possible to go to AWS and even then at scale onboard resources to the likes of, for example, Azure Security Center. But Azure Arc can also extend Azure policy and Azure governance capabilities not only to multi-clouds or third-party clouds, but also to on-premises. And I see Carl already pasted the introduction in Amazon. Thanks so much, Carl. We have also one other question. Can I connect my on-prem services? If the question is if the on-prem services can be connected to Azure Sentinel, the answer is yes. So let me then also quickly show it. And these are great questions. Feel free to keep them coming. We do have time towards the end for Q&A, so make sure we also cover any questions that you might have. So feel free to either come off mute or use the chat window and keep the questions coming. With that being said, I'll switch to my demo environment to give you a glimpse into Azure Sentinel. I trust everyone can see my screen, and what's coming up is the overview So just to maybe highlight, what we're seeing now is the homepage of sort for Azure Sentinel. So we mentioned it's part of the Azure portal. So I can also access it if I go here and select Azure Sentinel. It's going to bring us to the overview page. Now here we can select the time period in question. We can even put it as a custom range. I'm just going to leave it the last 24 days. And what's highlighted here, straight away we can see the number of events that were collected, but also a comparison with the previous time period in question. So here we see we have less events collected here than we had in the previous 24 hours. We see how many new alerts we have, also the trend, and the number of incidences. So if you remember when we covered, alerts would be that a low fidelity, whereas incidences would be high fidelity, so rich context. We also see then color coded by the alert type, and if maybe enterprise or a company has several locations, even worldwide, there's even a map that they could look to highlight potentially malicious network traffic. With that, I thought I'd offer maybe a workflow or a flow of how everyone would typically start with Sentinel. So let's assume that this would be the first way you're starting, or maybe you haven't had the opportunity yet to make yourself familiar with Sentinel. The first thing I would suggest is looking at the data connectors. So we covered integrating, ease of integrating with third-party sources is key of success for every SIEM. So the way we bring data into Sentinel is we have a couple of different options. The main one and the most convenient is through the data connectors. So I selected the data connectors, and here I can see the number of data connectors. So these are those service-based connectors that I can use to bring not only Microsoft data or alerts from Microsoft data sources, but also from third party. So if I go to answer the question around on-premises, yes, this is also supported. So I could even look to bring maybe syslog, and or Ceph is also one of the connectors here, and use that to bring data into Azure Sentinel. If we maybe expand on syslog as an example, so once I select here what data source I would like to bring into Azure Sentinel, I see here the open connectors page. So if I click on it, and even before I have this description of what's actually going to be brought into Sentinel, I can even open the connectors page, and really here I get guidance and detailed prerequisites which are needed. So I need write permission to set up this connector, and I even have here guidance on how I can configure it. Now, obviously, in the case of syslog, you would need to then collect it from Linux agent. So here I have this guidance as well. Once I've connected it, which is the case here, where we see the status is already connected, I can also leverage here analytic rules. So we can see analytic rules as the SIEM logic. And here for every connector, we already have out of the box analytic rules. So I can go ahead and with just one click, I can create here the SIEM logic based on each one of the connectors. I can also visualize data in the form of workbooks, which we're going to cover a little bit later. So with that being said, once I've done this, it's even going to be color coded. So in green, it's going to be the connectors which are connected. If I go, for example, maybe to AWS. So let's see if we have a AWS data source connected. Or are we calling it differently? We do Amazon Web Services. So I can even expand on that connector just to showcase and highlight. So I do have an Azure Mass plugin, which obfuscates sensitive data. So this is why this is obfuscated. But I also, similarly to the other connectors, I can see what prerequisites are needed and how to configure it, and what are the next steps. So what can I use that's already out of the box provided to visualize the data, what I can use to query the logs, and what even SIEM logic I can then out of the box here create with just a couple of clicks. So that would be the first step, bringing data into Sentinel. I can bring it from Microsoft, so from first-party sources. I can bring it through Syslog and Ceph, even from on-premises, and I can even bring it with these connectors and Ceph and Syslog as well from even third-party clouds. So once I've connected the data sources that I want to bring into Sentinel, I can go ahead into logs and maybe even do just a quick test, such as, for example, Azure Activity, and make sure that the data, as I see here, is already instantaneously being brought into Sentinel. Now, for first-party connectors, this is relatively straightforward. For third-party connectors, it might take a while depending on their SLA, but for first-party, I almost see it instantaneously, and I can even then check it here by executing the command. The language I use here is Custom Query Language, or KQL, which there's also a lot of other great resources about it. And if you may have, if you're maybe familiar with the Microsoft platform, this is something you may already have been using or are using currently. So you can also then just use it here. And obviously this was just an example to make sure that we have data, confirm the data is being brought into Sentinel. We see it here, great. So maybe as the next step, now that I confirmed that my data is being brought into Sentinel, I can go ahead and I can switch to the Analytics tab. And the Analytics tab is going to show me what are the active rules that I have in Sentinel. So we can see this as our SIEM logic. In a sense, we have data being brought in. So what would be like to detect in that data? And here I can also leverage what we showcase for each connector, templates. So here I can select a specific rule. We see several here. So we see we have more than 114, if I'm not mistaken, currently, or much, much more. And we can even go ahead and see we have even more. So we have in total 191, and the number is growing. So I also have here in this demo environment a couple of rules already set up. I can nonetheless always create a new one. So I can create a Microsoft one, so one that's provided by out of the box, which even then spans workloads. So it brings us back to XDR. So I might even go ahead and create something that's called Fusion, a rule that takes several workloads into account and then queries data and correlates it using machine learning. What I can also do is I can do a new rule, such as a scheduled query rule. So let me go ahead just to show you how that looks like. So I can go ahead and maybe as an example, I would like to, when someone deletes Azure VM, so description is going to be simple detection. And here I can even map it to the MITRE tactics. Now this is for me gonna obviously have an impact because here I'm, as an example, putting in when an Azure VM is deleted. And the severity, I might just put it informational. I'll leave it enabled for now. And next step is to set the rule logic. Now the rule logic is, again, I'm using that custom query language to say that would be Azure Activity where, and as you see, I'm writing in real time, and I'm getting already with IntelliSense, I'm getting a couple of suggestions here. So let me just double check if I remember. It's operation name equal. And I can then also say with status equal if my memory serves me is accepted. And I can even then query it using the log, or if I put in everything correctly, I can even here simulate to be the alerts. So great, we don't have in this demo environment any virtual machines that were deleted. However, if there was, I can even then hit here a test with current data and run a simulation to determine how many results would this query then have. With that being said, I can then also map it to different entities that can be used for investigation, and I can even determine with what kind of a frequency this query should be ran, and even threshold. So maybe if someone deletes only more than 10 VMs, I want to be notified, or more than 5. Then if I go next, I can then determine and fine grain how I would like those high fidelity incidences to be reflected in Sentinel, and maybe how I would like for the low incident alerts to be grouped. So that's possible here as well. Currently, I'm just going to put it as default. And the next part is going to be all around automation. So here I can go ahead and I can define a workflow that I would like for to be executed once Sentinel picks up that this specific activity that we defined in set rule has been we use it. But once we have the rules defined here, we can see which ones are active, and we can even disable some of them. So just to circle back, so first step would be to bring the relevant data connectors. Now there are even first-party Microsoft data sources which can be brought into Sentinel at no additional charge. You can find it on this Azure Sentinel pricing website. Then we, in the logs, we did a quick test to make sure the data is being ingested into Sentinel. Now, as part of the analytics, we showcased how we can already start creating our logic, so our SIEM logic. We can use templates, which are already provided, so out of the box, or we can create a new rule, like I showcased. Very, very simple to do, even for myself on the fly. Once we've done that, we can then go into the incidences. And the incidences section is going to showcase to us, so those potentially active and ongoing attacks. Again, we can filter for a specific custom range or maybe a default time period, and we can even filter based on severity. So maybe as a SOC analyst, I would like to focus first on medium and high severity. So let me go ahead and bring those ones up. And here for each one, I can also see the number of alerts. Now, if I scroll down to see a couple, I see here Mimikatz. Now, Mimikatz is a tool that's, when used, might present a very, very huge risk and potentially a breach to our environment. So when I select it, I can then manage this incident. So I can assign it to someone, I can change its status, I can even amend the severity of it. I see the incidences, even the tactic that's being used. And what I can also do is when I click investigate. So once I've connected the data sources to Sentinel, what Sentinel is also going to do is when it ingests that data, it's also going to create a graph database. And that graph database is used then to give us this kind of a visualization where we can even see then dependencies between different entities. Each entity I can also select, interact with it. I even have here a blade that gives me more information. I can even run workflows on demand as part of my investigation. So playbooks would be a way for me to run actual workflows on the fly. I can even click here timeline to get an understanding what actually happened here. So I see there was a malicious credential theft tool executed, then a potentially suspicious credential activity, Mimikatz was detected, and here I really then as a SOC analyst can interact with each one of these entities. What I can also do is if I click maybe on a different entity to showcase it, I even have different here options. And when I click here, what Sentinel is going to do is in real time, Sentinel is going to go to the logs, it's going to go to its graph database, and it's going to visualize this. And I can always then access it if I like to. But really powerful example of how not only this graphical interface is being used, but also how machine learning is being used here to correlate the events and give us not only a timetable, but also a graphical overview. Now I can also see all the entities such as endpoints, processes, user identities, or other entities that might have been used. I also see a grouping of alerts. If you may have noticed, this is an incident containing 50 plus alerts. So opposite to a SOC analyst needing to go through all 50, here, again, we're going from a lot of low fidelity alerts to a fewer rich incidences or higher fidelity incidences. And obviously I can then select each one of these alerts as well. Insights is also a new function, but if I close this visualization, I can also see here full details as all the alerts that are being correlated to this incident. And even as a SOC analyst, I can go here into bookmarks, and I can even start then to proactively hunt for alerts. Now, this is something we can also see here when we click on hunting. Hunting is a section for companies who want to be more proactive when it comes to cybersecurity. We see a lot of queries here being provided by Microsoft. So if you remember the more than 35 dedicated cybersecurity professionals working with Microsoft, so they contribute these queries that can be used by companies and customers. So here I can also leverage that knowledge already, and I can even see for which data sources I can leverage it. Or I can also create my own query. Now, one thing that I also highlighted was workbooks, which is the ability to then visualize data. Now we have workbooks already being made available out of the box. Here I see a list of not only first party, but also third party. So maybe if I go to, and now it's maybe a guessing game for which one I have permissions to see it. But here a SOC analyst can also then visualize the data that's being brought by specific either data sources or data that's in general being brought into Sentinel. Now, this is something that due to the thriving community, it's also possible to go on to GitHub and download also new and different workbooks. One other thing that I would like to highlight before I go into notebooks, because that was also a particular interest I saw in the chat window, was the ability to have maybe an overview for specific alerts and or entities. So here, this is quite a new feature. So if I go into entities, I can see for user identities, which account have the highest number of alerts, which hosts have the highest number of alerts. This also does support service principles, so even applications. So if I select our good friend Jeff here, I have a blade outlining all the alerts tied to Jeff. Very, very powerful if I'm thinking maybe of of users with a higher privilege inside of a company, such as IT administrators or maybe IT directors or maybe even parts of the board or the C-suite. So here I have then overview for that specific entity, which can be a user, it can be application, it can be a host. Notebooks is something I also wanted to just cover on briefly because it goes again, to those more than 3,500 dedicated cybersecurity professionals contributing machine learning algorithms that can be used here. And we even have it in different categories. So getting started, ones that can be even used when someone is performing a hunting activity or an investigation. So these are already provided by Microsoft. For most of them, it's just a matter of importing data in them and running them, such as maybe cross-checking an IP address against the cyber threat intelligence data or known bad actor IP addresses. So I can go here. It does rely on Azure Notebooks as well. So if I want to launch it here, I will see that I need the Azure ML workspace as well. One thing I wanted to highlight, and maybe just to circle back, so if someone wants to really get a sense for Sentinel and flavor, so I would go to data connectors. I would decide what data I would like to bring into Sentinel. Then when I go to logs, I can check if data is being brought into Sentinel. In analytics, I can already use pre-built rules, or I can define my own. What do I want to detect in all of this data? So what's it really that are the use cases for my company? And then I can see, should those be detected, I can see them reflected in the incidences. Now, I can also proactively hunt, use even notebooks to leverage machine learning at scale across my data set. And I can even then have out of the box or even custom visualizations for the data. And in entity behavior, we also showcase, I can even go and I can even look at granularly at specific entities such as identities for a user, maybe identities for applications, or even endpoints, and really go into that for each one of them. One thing I would also like to highlight is the automation. So if you remember, I refer to this as playbooks. I will, however, show it in a different environment that I have. So this is playbooks in the background are run using a logic app. So if you're familiar with logic apps, so this kind of a visualization should then be familiar, where I can then have, I can already leverage built-in logic to tie it to Sentinel, and I can define a workflow. Now, there are even specific logic apps like this one that I created, which I actually took from the GitHub page itself. So this is something I imported into my own subscription, where I'm able, as part of an investigation, I'm able to launch a logic app. So this one is going to get geo information from an IP address and even tag the incident accordingly. Now I can expand each one of them, but there is even a one here that I wanted to outline. So if I expand on it, just to give you that sense for, because I don't need to manually input all of it, so I can leverage dynamic context. For those of you who already may be familiar with the logic apps, is very, very similar to different processes that you might have already done here. Just to also share with you, the logic app that I have here, since my rule was when a Azure VM is deleted, the workflow that I'm defining here is it's gonna then it's gonna receive that incident from Sentinel, and it's gonna, so in my case here, in my demo environment, I have a specific team that is responsible for all infrastructure operations. Now, in your use case, that might be even a specific user. So you just might need an additional step here to get that user entity information. However, here, I know a specific infrastructure team is responsible, and I send them an email outlining the alert and saying, was it you? Or wasn't it you that deleted this resource in Azure? If it was, so depending on here, if it's true, if they said yes, it was us, so I can go ahead and I can close the incident. However, if it wasn't them, which is going to be this full section here of the conditional branch, I can go ahead and say, I can go to the incident, I can add a comment to it, which is going to be then reflected in the incident looked by the SOC analyst. And I can even then go to the teams of that specific SOC team and post, we have a new alert from Azure Sentinel, please investigate. So this is very, very easy and very, very straightforward to do. And it's mostly, once one is familiar with logic apps, just a matter of drag and drop. Now I can then use that as part of my demo environment that I have here. I created here, this is part of a separate subscription, which is why we don't have as much data, but I have here that Azure VM logic, so that I created, and under playbooks or workbooks, I have that automation that I can then that I can execute. I can even then, if I go to the analytics, so if I select this rule, if I want to edit it, so this is going to be similar to the rule that we created. We have here the logic, we have here the settings we can define, but for the automated response, I selected, if I go back, the workflow that I outlined. So once I use KQL to determine what is the rule, the logic that I want to bring into Sentinel and detect, I can also here define a workflow as a response to it, which I already did here, and I even have two, and one is even going to get then information from the IP address and tag the incident accordingly. So there is it. I wanted to give you that kind of a glimpse into Sentinel, quite high level, but hopefully you found it useful to get a flavor and sense for Sentinel. I'm not sure if we maybe have any questions. So I see from Carl on KQL, yeah. We do have learning resources, so we have Microsoft official ones. What I've also heard is the Pluralsight free course on KQL to also be a very, very good resource. If you may have already purchased the book Azure Sentinel by Yuri Diogenes and Nicholas DeCola, it does have towards the end how to get started with KQL, very, very beneficial as well. So those would be the three main resources I hear people employing: either the Microsoft Learn Path and KQL, so the free Pluralsight course, and the book on Sentinel that written by Jonathan, Yuri, and Nicholas, which also has towards the end a section on getting started with KQL.
Excellent.
Hi, Bojan. Just thanks very much for that interesting talk. I've got a quick question, if that's okay. We've got imagine there's a customer and they've got a small IT team, and the small IT team's really busy, and they're interested in Sentinel, but they're concerned about the management in BAU that will be placed upon them from if they adopt it. What would an average day look like to somebody who was looking after Sentinel, just from the sorts of activities that they would get involved in, and how much of their time would it take for a relatively small company? And it's might be hard to estimate, but I'm guessing that's the profile for a lot of your potential customers for this product.
Great question, Darren. So I see kind of two-pronged approach: either companies that want to manage it themselves, or companies that might prefer to have or to purchase a managed service. So to have someone like a MSSP or a partner manage that environment for them. For smaller companies, I see mostly the latter. So for smaller companies, I don't see them going down the route of them wanting to manage it, just because of the fact that most of them do prefer a 24/7 managed service. And when I take that into consideration, is then having the people with the right skills, expertise, and even then taking into consideration annual leave, different shifts. So I see more companies going down the MSSP approach when they have a partner providing this as a service for them.
Right. Okay. And you recommend? So I'm just trying to think. Even if it was an MSP, or not necessarily. If we go for a slightly larger company, I'm trying to understand how much you talked about the false positives and the alert fatigue and how Sentinel addresses that. I'm just trying to understand how much additional effort is required from implementing Sentinel. Maybe not a small company, but say several hundred people.
Great question. So let me then try to expand on it and share my views on it. So the way Sentinel is built, it's a cloud native service, meaning everything that we showcase, bringing data in, sending up analytics, and even logic, we can see doesn't take awful lot of time. So I even saw examples of a working proof of concept being implemented in less than a week. And that's
Right.
even with the workshop and evangelizing, explaining what it is, and even so less than a week to get an enterprise grade SIEM, which is amazing and can only be done with cloud native solutions. That being said, what I also see then companies leveraging is if they already have security operations center analysts or a SOC team, it's just a matter of adopting then Sentinel. They probably already have a process, so it goes back to the technology, the process, and the people. If they have the people, if they have the processes, it's more just then figuring out how can this process, how does it look in this technology? And obviously they can look, if they already have a SOAR capability, they can even look to integrate it. So that kind of a learning curve then even diminishes because they're already integrating it with something they know, such as maybe ITCM solutions, such as ServiceNow or other SOAR capability that we have. So that's also something to be on the lookout for. If they have a SOAR capability, they can integrate it in Sentinel, because from my experience, SOC analysts are fond of their SOAR capability. They know it, they have a lot of experience with it, so they prefer to integrate it and go down the better together route. Now, if they don't have it, then Logic Apps is a great fit. But also if they do have it, Logic Apps, for what I showcased, kind of enriching, investigating, is also a great fit together with ML. So one thing I also want to be appreciative of, so Sentinel is a cloud native SIEM, meaning it does offer also ML. So you don't have to have a data scientist to run these algorithms, but it's something you can also get familiar with. And most of them are just taking information and using the ML algorithm for it to be run across the, let me call it, the data sources and the data estate. So it would be more towards what are they actually looking to leverage Sentinel for. If they already have existing processes, more mapping those processes into Sentinel, but also taking into consideration if they have processes that are kind of falling outside of the scope, maybe that the previous solution didn't offer, also then adding those as plus. We need to actually leverage ML to build out that next generation SOC capabilities, and we can even maybe look to have automation of sort as part of the investigation.
That's great. Thanks, Bojan. Thank you.
My pleasure. And thank you, Carl, also for helping out with the Q&A. Thank you, Finian. My pleasure. Is there a link? Yeah, I see Carl beat me to it. Let me just double check.
That's me making sure that's the link.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so this book does also have, it's written by people from the product group, Nicholas, Yuri, and also Jonathan, one of our cybersecurity leaders in Microsoft. So a great book. Not doing any kind of a promo for them here, my honest opinion. If it's solely towards KQL, you also have the MS Learn and the free, if something didn't change until last week, the free poor side course on KQL. This book would be more towards getting that intermediate to advanced knowledge around Sentinel. What I also recommend the book for, if you have, if you're interested in learning about Azure notebooks in Sentinel. So the team did a great job in highlighting how to really operationalize Azure Notebook ML. Oh, my pleasure. Can you expand on the possibilities for Azure Lighthouse and Azure Sentinel? Oh, I see that's from you, Carl. Yeah, a super important point. So when you think of maybe as a partner or our MSSP, so you would be then working with different customers. So the question becomes is if you're managing Azure Sentinel for multiple customers, you would prefer to have it then as inside of one, I'm going to call it dashboard. That's where Azure Lighthouse comes into play. So Azure Lighthouse, you can then, as the MSSP, leverage delegated permissions for Azure Lighthouse to have then, I'm going to say, information from those different customer tenants still visualized in Sentinel. The way it would look like, and I unfortunately can't show it here, I believe. So the way it would look like, when I go to my log analytics workspaces, I would, through Azure Lighthouse integration, I would see here and I would have a list of all the different workspaces that are that I'm managing for my customers. Now, obviously, this is not the best example. If I go maybe to Azure Sentinel, yes. So if I was to have several workspaces here, it would be just a matter of selecting them. And I have here the view incidences option. So that means I could then, in the single pane of glass, manage all the incidences across the customers that I work with. I can even then look to, if I go back to maybe the analytics rules, I can even then frame the queries for the queries to be run across multiple customer environments as well. So that I could also look to do it in the background. Great questions. Do we have any more questions? I see we're running out of time. Happy to stay on for a couple of minutes longer if we have any more questions.